Hello, this is my Capstone 3 assignment, and this is the video. Now getting into the video here, how would I have acted in this situation and why? So in these situations, it's always important to get the full story, especially you're going to be hearing things on the radio, like when you're dispatched, it's not going to be the full story. So you have to use that as well as when you get on scene, you have to build a story and build a kind of history really fast to kind of figure out what's going on. Obviously, you're not going to get the full story because you weren't there initially. Everybody's got their own version. The officer has one, the patient has one, and you'll have one. So you're going to have to do your best. Easier said than done, of course, especially with the officer. Like you have to take everything into account, and with the officer pretty determined on wanting you to administer a sedative before you have any information is it's kind of a dangerous thing to do because again you have no idea what the patient's history is. You have no idea what caused the altercation to go down. You have no idea if he was on any substances or medication that might react negatively, especially with the patient also claiming they have shortness of breath. It could just be from the restraint. It could just be from the positioning of the patient, but it could also be, let's say there was a physical altercation, they cracked a rib, the rib causes a pneumo, maybe there was an unseen injury and now he has a flail chest. Or maybe, again, just pressure. Or maybe he has having an anxiety attack or a panic attack and he's short of breath. It could be numerous medical things or physical things that have caused shortness of breath. So it's always important to get medical history and as well as advocate for the patient's best interest. You want to prioritize also the patient's health. Again, all of our directives, everything we've learned states patient care is still a priority. You obviously want to maintain your safety, your partner's safety, and the officer's safety as best as possible, but there's ways around it, right? There's positional changes, there's ways you can we have soft restraints, there's ways you can restrain the patient without immediately jumping to a sedative. If a patient is short of breath, giving them a sedative is not gonna, it's gonna make that worse, especially a sedative like ketamine. We have no idea, again, what caused the shortness of breath. So administering a medication just kind of fast like that isn't best practice, and it's very dangerous. It can be detrimental to the patient. And in this case, in real life, it was detrimental to the patient, along with other things. But you want to advocate for the patient, let the patient know. You want to communicate. You want to let the patient know that you're not just there for the officer's assistance. You're there for them as well. You're there to make sure that they're okay. You're there to make sure the call runs as smoothly as possible. You're there because you're needed. You're not just there to help restrain them and help the officer arrest them. Sorry. Now, obviously, like I said, this is easier said than done, but this will at least this will maintain the call. Like this can, in a way, contain the call from getting further out of hand. Now, potential personal biases. If we're talking about personal biases, again, patient appearance, we can go like directly into racial biases. You can screen an officer, you can screen a medic, you can screen a firefighter as much as you want. At the end of the day, everybody has some sort of bias, and some biases show more than others. And there is quite a stigma on Elijah was African American. It's a touchy subject, but if we're getting into that, it is there is a stigma around African Americans and suspicious behavior and criminal activity, of course. And he was accused of excited delirium, being a suspicious person, as well as being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Again, none of that was confirmed at the time, but again, this is just a good example of how personal biases can show that, like that's not the whole story, right? Biases and assumptions are pretty dangerous, and in this case, it very well may have cost him his life. Obviously, everything is unproven, and there's no way to prove it, right? If there's no initial documentation or actual proof of the officer stating that they had a bias on it. However, that's just one potential bias. Values as well. If a patient is under the influence, like if, for example, in Oshawa here, we have a lot of substance abuse and a lot of people who are addicted to drugs. And it's very clear that a lot of people don't agree with that. That goes against a lot of people's values and morals. And a lot of these people might just be going through a hard time. It might be something might have happened in their life. Maybe they're not able to, maybe they're not able to get over it. And they've turned to, it's unfortunate, but maybe they've turned to substance abuse or alcoholism, and that's their way of dealing with it. Again, nobody knows everything. Nobody knows what somebody's going through or what they've went through in their life. So that can kind of portray them in a negative way, and it doesn't align with other people's values. And a lot of people kind of they look down on drug users and people with drug habits, and that might affect like our quality of care that we give them. If they need any medical attention, we might just think, oh, he's just on drugs, he's just under the influence. And an officer may, obviously, if somebody's under the influence, everybody's going to be more wary and more cautious because, again, drugs can make you act erratically. You don't know what they took, you don't know how much of what they took, and in a way that makes everybody more cautious, and that can cause everybody to be more panicked and more stressed out, and it can lead to more physical altercations or more advanced or, in a way, more dramatic medical interventions or physical interventions from both paramedics as well as police officers. Now, other challenges may be, now the officer, in the initial article that I read, it did appear that the officer was on his own. Now, not that he was outnumbered, but if somebody is under the use of substances, it can, again, give them a physical advantage as well, right? And it can also make somebody cautious. They could be bigger in stature, they could be very muscular, they could honestly just present with a very, I guess, shady appearance, for lack of a better word. A hoodie covering their face, maybe they look like they're up to no good, but you never know, right? So people can get very nervous and get very panicked, and that again can also lead to escalation of the situation. And obviously, there are tools that police officers have that can unfortunately lead to civilian death, even if it were warranted in certain circumstances, like for self-defense. There are instances where accidents do happen, or like wrongful use of force and wrongful cause of death does occur. We've seen it obviously in the media recently and in the past, like ever since there's been video and photo and like pictures can be taken, especially on a mobile phone. We've seen that a lot. So that's another issue. And what might influence my decision making in this? Obviously, you're under a lot of pressure from the police officer. He's asking you to sedate the patient. He's asking you to do a lot. He's asking quite a lot of you, given you just arrive on scene. And obviously, you don't want to outright tell the officer no. You want to assess the situation as best as possible. And if we're talking about personal biases, and you don't want to just accuse the officer of having a bias or handling the situation wrong. You want to make sure that it just puts a strain on everything, right? Like usually police departments and paramedic services have a good relationship. They work together all the time. And so doing things like that, like making assumptions, accusing the officer of making a bad call or accusing them of any bias on how they handle their job does put a strain on that. And it can make the situation worse, right? The officer can react. He's already in a stressed state of mind. It can make him react more negatively, and it could increase the chances of the call going south. Skills and competencies you need to navigate this. Of course, communication with the patient, communication with the officers, communication with your partner, just to make the call run smoothly, what you're going to need, what you want to do, what your next steps and priorities are. You want to make sure that's all in line. You don't want to just, especially with a call like this, everything's kind of erratic. You want to make sure that if this goes wrong, you want this ready. These are your next steps. You want to make sure everybody's in a safe position. You want to make sure that for this call specifically, maybe reposition the patient. Hey, are you able to reposition the patient in a safe way that's better for him to breathe, that's appropriate for our safety, that makes sure nobody gets hurt? That's a good one. You want to advocate for your patient as well. Like, look, I know it's a very tense situation. I know he's not very compliant, but at the end of the day, I'm here to help him as well. He's struggling to breathe. He might be under the influence of stuff. We need to assess him. We need to see what else is wrong with him. He might have physical injuries. We got to make sure that he's okay as well. Anything to prevent harm to you, the patient, or other members on scene. Now, the decision in this case and how it could affect the patient's experience as well as outcomes, at both long-term, well, in this situation, obviously, patient experience was not good. It is possible that he had bad experiences with the police in the past, and that could negatively affect his view and lead to potential outcomes that are negative, non-compliance, thoughts that the police are out to get you, because again, if you're a minority, that is a common perception that the police do not like minorities, and that again, that can lead to mismanagement of the call and a negative patient experience, especially with all the videos you see online. Now, for long term, we can see, like, off of my report on the situation and the call that took place, it had negative outcomes for both the officers and the paramedics, as well as the community. The community was very up in arms about it, accusing it of racial inequality, wrongful use of force, just police injustice in general, right? Abuse of power. It put EMS and paramedics in question as well as their just the blind trust in police officers without getting the full story. The immediate use of ketamine as sedative is very dangerous, especially in this situation, right, with the patient already saying they're struggling to breathe. And I think that it negatively impacts professionalism as well. And it makes the family, the public, and unfortunately, Elijah lost his life, but if he did survive the situation, it would negatively impact his view of paramedics as well as police officers. And again, we kind of see this situation time and time again. And it does continuously bring down the reputation of EMS, police, and unfortunately, we're there for most people are there to help, and unfortunately, it paints everybody in a bad picture not to trust us. And if we're talking about outcomes, like we said, it can increase negative outcomes. Unfortunately, again, Elijah did pass away in this circumstance, and you see videos all the time online. You see calls escalating. Maybe a police officer or a paramedic is a little too rude or aggressive or passive aggressive when they're come in contact with a patient, based off of just call details or how the patient presents themselves. And it can lead to negative outcomes. It can lead to a patient not trusting you. It can lead to no cooperation. It can lead to you having to struggle to get through the call. And if the less information you have, the less cooperative the patient is, the worse the outcomes tend to possibly be. In order to provide quality care, you need to be fully invested, and the patient needs to be invested, right? Because you're there to help the patient, but in order to help the patient, you need to know the issue, you need to know what's going on, and you need to be reliant, as well as you need to also be reliant on the police officer or other medical professionals on scene that know what's going on.